and dive in. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Maggie Dixon. I am the Home Visiting Coordination Initiative, or HVCI, Development Coordinator at Prevent Child Abuse New York and the Policy Assistant at Prevent Child Abuse New York. And I head up our monthly.
Hi, this is nice.
Go ahead and mute some participants. So we offer this webinar series typically on a monthly basis, sometimes a couple times a month, as an opportunity for learning and discussion and a forum for conversation. So a couple housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers.
Okay.
Fine, here we are. So this session is recorded and will be available on the Home Visiting Coordination Initiative website following today. I'll send a follow-up email with resources from the presenters and links to how to access that recording. Closed captioning services are turned on, so you can navigate to the bottom of your screen and hit the CC button to be able to see those. Again, just reiterating, please remember to mute and place all questions you have in the chat box. We'll be monitoring it throughout the session. Finally, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, I'll be sending a follow-up email after today with a link to the recording, any resources the presenters share, and information about a survey. We partner with the Center for Human Services Research to conduct data collection. The Home Visiting Coordination Initiative is a project of the Preschool Development Birth Through 5 grant, and a component of that federal grant is data collection on all activities. So we truly appreciate you filling out that survey. It allows us to ensure these webinars can continue to happen. So without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce Anna Marie and Susan from the Strong Starts Court Initiative. So they'll be joining us today to talk a little bit about their work and just to make some connections. So Susan and Anna Marie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maggie, so much for this invitation, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Susan Chin. I'm a psychologist, and I am serving as an infant mental health consultant to the Center for Court Innovation. And Anna Marie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Marie Triolanis. I'm a clinical social worker, and I'm the clinical supervisor of the Strong Starts Court Initiative.
And Strong Starts is a project, as I mentioned, of the Center for Court Innovation, which is a New York-based nonprofit that whose mission is to create a more humane justice system and to use court involvement as an opportunity for positively changing the trajectory of court-involved people. So that we were thrilled 8 years ago that they were interested in this project. And it's really hard to believe it is almost 8 years old already. Strong Starts is a family court-based project that focuses on infants and toddlers who have and their parents who have child protection cases in the family courts. We very much share the age group of most home visiting projects, being very focused on babies birth to 3 years of age. And I just want to say before we dive in that this project was very much emanated out of clinical work. For more than 30 years, I directed a program for children under 5, a therapeutic program for children under 5 at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. We worked with lots and lots of children who were in foster care or otherwise known to the child welfare system. And much of what I'm going to talk about at the beginning of this talk really this data is represented in the literature, but it also emerges from our day-to-day clinical work. And I think some of this will feel very familiar to you as well. Okay, we'll dive in. Okay, first problem. Why aren't the slides advancing? They were a minute ago. There we go. Okay. A different button. So here are some of the objectives we will hope to get to today. We're going to review the characteristics and life experience of infants and toddlers who are known to the child welfare system, as well as those of their parents and families. We'll review the components of specialized infant toddler court models as we do them in Strong Starts and as they are also implemented nationally. We'll talk about how the family courts can be a port of entry into very high quality services for very young children and families. That's not always the case, but Strong Starts and other programs like it use the court involvement as an opportunity to bring high quality services to families. We'll also talk about how clinical assessment and clinical coordination can result in more meaningful services for court-involved children and families. And we'll talk about how family court judges and attorneys benefit from learning about home visiting programs and other evidence-backed interventions in the infant family field. I'll just say before we leave this slide that home visiting programs are very unfamiliar to the family courts until Strong Starts. And it was really a very important accomplishment to educate judges and lawyers about home visiting programs. I remember one lawyer saying to me very specifically that she was very happy to learn about services that come into families' homes, because in families with infants, it's hard for families to get places often. Okay, so why the focus on babies in the family court? Well, we'll start with their numbers. Children birth to 3 years of age are very disproportionately represented in the child welfare system. For the past several years, as far back as I can remember, there have been really over 10,000 babies birthed to 3 years of age on the family court dockets just in New York City. To me, that's always seemed like a very, very large number. And statewide, I should say that we only have data from the first of the year in 2019, but on that date, there were more than 16,000 infants and toddlers birthed to 3 years of age on the family court docket statewide. So we have lots and lots of young children who essentially start their lives in the child welfare system. And although that's our local data, national data reflects the same thing. About 20% of first-time admissions to foster care are children under 12 months of age. And so this is a very large percentage of the child welfare system population. And in addition to the very large numbers, we're concerned because infants are the most vulnerable group in the child welfare system with respect both to their safety and well-being and also to their developmental trajectories. So infants and toddlers stay in foster care longer than older children. They're more vulnerable to repeat maltreatment, whether they're in foster care or whether they've been returned to their parents. National literature suggests that 20 to 25% of infants who are returned to their parents within the first year of life also return to foster care again. And more than 50% of infants and toddlers experience at least 2 moves in foster care. So I know this group is familiar with attachment theory and research and the high risk of attachment disruptions to very young children. So these are all very troubling descriptions of what their experiences are. And just to remind that these adversities, attachment disruptions, changes in primary caregivers are occurring during the most formative stage of early development and have the greatest impact at this age on children's neurodevelopment. And our babies in the child welfare system experience multiple levels of risk and adversity, starting with often prenatal exposures to drugs and alcohol. That's often the port of entry into the child welfare system. Sometimes those experiences are accompanied by limited or no prenatal care, and also accompanied by high rates of prematurity and or low birth weight. So these babies have lots of gestational risks. And then if we think that some parents may lose their children because of severe mental health problems or developmental disabilities, then we know that these babies carry some genetic predispositions. The biggest risk factor that affects all of the families, or a large majority of the families that we work with, is poverty. We'll show you a chart later that shows how many of our families are poverty affected. And we know that's an umbrella for so many risk factors, including housing insecurity and homelessness, which is a big risk factor in our population. The children often, if they haven't been removed from their parents at birth, often they've gone through a period of time with markedly unmet needs in the areas of safety and shelter, hunger and physical comfort. Sometimes the children have had lots of chaotic experiences before they come into care, and then also when they are in care. Often, parental lifestyle issues have not permitted for routines to support children's self-regulation. We've spoken about the experience many of the children have with multiple caregivers or multiple changes in primary caregivers. That happens before children come into the child welfare system, as parents who are struggling lean on others, or family members try to take over when a parent is struggling. And then it often happens again once they are in the child welfare system. Of course, the events that precipitate their involvement in the child welfare system often involve neglect or physical or sexual abuse, or exposure to family violence or other forms of trauma. And then, we'll talk a lot about all the attachment disruptions that come from parental incarceration, parental death from overdoses, abandonment, the removal of the babies from their parents, and again, the multiple changes in foster care. And we see among our families that there are often intergenerational patterns of insecure attachment. So that's a lot of risk for our babies to carry. I'm not going to go into the ACE studies. I know you've all heard about these studies for a very long time. I'm just listing the 10 original ACEs because many of our children have had multiple of these adverse childhood experiences. And I'm sure you're equally familiar with the ACE pyramid that shows the impact starting with exposure and all the way up through the adult years. And all I'll say about this is that our children, little as they are often already on the second tier of this pyramid with disrupted neurodevelopment, and some of them are already on the third tier, little as they are, of already showing social, emotional, or developmental delays. In one study of children in foster care, a study by the National Survey, a study called the National Survey of Child and Adolescent Wellbeing, they found that children in foster care had often experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences by the time they are 2 years old. And we know that that's the threshold at which we begin to see so many impacts on children's development and on their later courses, in later childhood as well. And the parents of the children also have very complex needs. Many of the parents we work with were in foster care themselves when they were children, or otherwise known to the child welfare system. Many of the parents have had a very high number of adverse childhood experiences as well. Often they have very, very few social supports. Often they're contending with long-lasting mental health problems, long-lasting and undertreated. Similarly, substance use or substance dependency. Many of the parents were victims of violence in their own childhoods, or still are in domestic violence situations. Many have cognitive limitations or learning difficulties. There's a lot of financial stress. Again, we'll talk about the poverty that affects so many families. Often they'll have lower levels of educational achievement and therefore are not highly competitive in the job market. Sometimes they're also facing concurrent criminal charges. So there are a lot of stresses among the parents. Again, a lot of this information emerges from our experience, but there's really an excellent article that I have cited at the bottom that describes characteristics of parents of very, very young children who are known to the child welfare system. This is actually from our project. This is a chart that lists the risk factors that have been identified across all of our cases, now up to about 210 families that we've worked with. And you can see from this that 70% of our families are from poverty-related backgrounds. It's just a huge number, and it really, encompasses so many other risks. That almost 60% of our parents have very high ACE scores. 58% are contending with mental illness. And this chart just reflects the things that I've mentioned. I'll also say that among our parents, there's an average of over 5 of these risk factors co-occurring. So these are families that are holding, a lot of adversity. Okay, so the children have challenges and the parents have challenges, and so does the child welfare system have a lot of challenges. The child welfare system obviously is created to protect children and families. But it's a hard system for the people who work in it and for the people who become known to it. If you can imagine how a parent feels when a child is removed or the child welfare system becomes involved in their lives, it's very hard to then engage those parents and build the trust that they need to work with caseworkers or others from the system. And case planners often have very large caseloads that don't allow for the amount of work that's really needed on each case. There are many, many practitioners and very little communication between them often. We're experiencing frequent turnover of staff, and every time a caseworker is changed, case progress is forestalled because the new caseworker has to learn the case all over again. We find in the field some confusion about confidentiality and decision-making, who is allowed to know certain information, who is allowed to make decisions for children, who can give consent for services. There's often a lot of confusion about that. Very importantly, court is court, and it's usually quite adversarial, and family court is no different. And so people are protective in how they defend their clients, and that leads to sometimes withholding information or other adversarial strategies that make case progress difficult. Parents experience the system as oppressive and punitive. It is a harsh system for families. Because many of our parents have been involved in the child welfare system as children, this is re-triggering their trauma from that time. Very importantly, and Strong Starts makes a difference in this way, there's usually no clinical assessment in the child welfare system that guides service planning. And so often there are very generic services offered to families that don't target their particular or very specific issues. Again, there's very little knowledge of early development in the child welfare system. Many of the court decisions are not guided by attachment theory or research or anything that we all have learned about developmental neuroscience. There's been very little knowledge of what are the evidence-backed interventions in the infant family field. I mentioned how happy people were to learn about home visiting programs as an example. And again, the issues of confidentiality often prevent judges and lawyers from knowing how families are doing in services, and so it's hard to base decisions on progress or lack of progress, since there's often very little information sharing from service providers. Okay, and I don't want to keep reading lists of things, but we know that foster parents don't get great preparation when they welcome a new child into their home. They often are not told that much about children's histories. They're not often trained very well in how to raise a child who's had a very traumatic history. They're not really given a lot of information about how to manage the behavior of children who have had trauma. So there's too little preparation, and they're leaned on too heavily. We don't have enough foster homes. Foster parents are often asked to take more children than is probably smart to have in any one home, given the high level of need of all of the children. Many foster parents work and they're dependent on childcare. So these kids with great needs go into childcare programs that have variable quality aspects to them. And children get moved. They get moved too many times in foster care, either because a sibling is born or a new family member appears. There are lots of reasons, or foster parents ask for a child's removal. And each time a child changes foster homes, they often lose services. So in addition to the attachment disruption, they are losing services as well. And then I guess maybe most importantly, court takes a very, very long time to resolve the case, and that long period of time impedes the development of children who are not growing up with their parents, impedes the development of attachment between children and parents who are not raising them. And so by the time the court is ready for reunification, we have another attachment disruption from foster parents. We want children to go back to their parents. We're all working very hard for that. But if it takes 2 or 3 years for that to happen, children are pulled away from the only parents that they've known all that time. So lots and lots of challenges in the foster care system. It's probably not surprising then, given all that I've talked about so far, that we typically have poor outcomes for these very young children who enter the child welfare system as babies. They have very high rates of health and medical problems. They have much higher rates than usual of developmental problems. We see emotional and behavioral problems that we don't see in children who grew up in stronger families. And when they have developmental problems or emotional behavioral problems, they don't have great access to corrective therapeutic services. They have long periods of instability. We don't often see these children attending really high quality early care and education services. On the parent level, we see high levels of conflict between the parents and foster parents, or between the parents and caseworkers. It is a tense relationship that's fraught with all of the high emotions that parents have when their children have been removed from them. Sometimes that results in missed visits with children. It's just very painful for parents to visit with their children and then reenact that separation over and over again. Sometimes parents don't comply with the service plans that have been recommended for them, either because they're not realistic, or they're very, very difficult to comply with, or they're not really very well matched to what parents feel themselves they need help with. We see very high rates of recidivism among parents who are trying to get treatment for their mental health or substance use problems, but often there are a couple of steps forward and lots of steps backward in that process. And we do see maltreatment recurrence. Okay, so our kids come to your kinds of services or to early childhood mental health services with lots of concerns. I would say dysregulation is probably the most common. Children who have tantrums, children who don't sleep well, and then there are kids who have traumatic stress responses, have heightened arousal, startle easily, have high levels of anxiety. We often see babies with negative mood, irritability. Sometimes it goes the other way, and we see kids who are very overactive and impulsive. Aggression is a very common symptom among these children. Sometimes, depending on the children's experience, we see them displaying sexual behaviors. There's a syndrome called hyperphagia that we see really only in children in foster care, and that's a syndrome where children eat very, very excessively with really no point of satiation. We think that's maybe related to neglect in their earliest days. Sometimes we see indiscriminate social behavior that reflects an attachment disorder, where children just readily attach to somebody, whether that's a familiar person or not. We worked with one little boy whose foster parents decided to become his foster parents because at the foster agency, he just latched onto them. They were there for another reason. And so that's not a typical response of a young child. The babies have fears. We've heard about children fearing diaper changes, bathtubs, fearing men, fears of being alone, that reflects some of the traumatic experience that they've had. Sometimes in the most severe cases, we see self-injurious behaviors or developmental regressions. Many of these young children, if they've been in care for a while, meet criteria for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or complex trauma. Certainly, as I've mentioned before, many of them have developmental delays or disorders. And again, the child welfare system has more generic interventions, parenting classes, which are didactic, 10 series of 10 or 12 classes, group-based, usually not individualized to particular parents, or anger management. Those are the common ones. Anger management often used quite inappropriately when there's been family violence. And again, parents do get mental health services, they get substance use treatment, but these are not always tailored to their particular needs. We see too few of our babies getting early intervention without lots and lots of advocacy. And we'll focus on this next one. We see very few interventions outside of Strong Starts that specifically target the parent-child relationship. And so it's an important and very consistent recommendation from us that there be relational supports, interventions that remediate the parent-child relational problems that come from separating children from their parents, or that come from the traumatic experiences that families have contended with. And because our kids are so little, people don't always appreciate how much they've been impacted by trauma, and sometimes we run across the misperception that the children are too young to need psychotherapeutic support for their traumatic experiences. Okay, so we've gone through this, I'm not going to belabor it, but typical child welfare interventions are generic. They don't emanate out of a really good assessment of what the parent or family or child needs. We know that you can lose a child if you have intellectual disabilities, or if you have a substance use disorder, or if there's violence in your family, and it cannot be possible the same intervention parenting classes can fix all of those different problems. And as I've just said, they don't usually include the relational supports that we think are so front and center in what many of their families need. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Anna Marie, who's going to tell you more about how Strong Starts differs from these practices as usual.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So Susan just highlighted the many systemic challenges in meeting the needs of infants and toddlers and their families who are family court involved. And I'm now going to discuss the components of the Strong Starts Court Initiative, which aims to address these challenges. Strong Starts is a specialized family court-based 2-generational approach developed to meet the needs of very young children during their foundational stage of development. It does this by focusing on the infant's need for protection and secure attachment, and by considering all child welfare practices through the lens of promoting healthy development and sorry about that, and a solid foundation for infant mental health. Our model is adapted from the 0 to 3 Safe Babies Court Teams model, with adaptations that meet the unique needs of families residing in New York City and Westchester. Strong Starts brings the science of early childhood development to the child welfare system and to the court process. Although court is essentially a legal system, there are many opportunities to use developmental science to guide planning and decision-making for infants and families. Strong Starts uses collaboration between child development specialists, legal practitioners, judges, and case planners to best support the needs of infants.
Sorry, Anna Marie, I was just trying to make sure. Okay.
That's okay. Okay, next slide. So here is the outline of the essential components of the model. In each borough, there is at least one dedicated science-informed judge who's a champion for young children. We work with children who are 0 to 3, both who are in foster care or in out-of-home placements, as well as families that have their children home under court-ordered supervision. There is a clinical coordinator in each borough who is an infant mental health specialist and works in partnership with the judge. Whenever possible, there are dedicated attorneys from the legal groups, and the clinical coordinator conducts screenings and assessments of the infant, the parent, and the whole family system that helps to inform and guide individualized service plans. Strong Starts also has a strong network of high-quality service providers who have partnered with Strong Starts to accept and prioritize referrals. The model includes monthly clinical conferences that are led by the clinical coordinator that bring together the family, the child welfare agency, the attorneys, and providers, and monthly court conferences with the judge that provide many opportunities for communication and collaboration. Strong Starts also holds trainings for the court and provider communities, as well as a steering committee, which provides the opportunity for stakeholders to come together on behalf of infants and toddlers and their families.
No, okay.
Strong Starts places a strong focus on components that aim to reduce the impact of trauma and to prevent further trauma, including an emphasis on preserving children's placements when they've been remanded in an attempt to prevent further attachment disruption. Clinical coordinators help get families connected to high quality, trauma responsive relational interventions that include children's caregivers to promote healing and strengthening of the attachment relationship. There is a focus on providing psychoeducation and support directly to parents and caregivers on child development and trauma. There's also a focus on frequent contact between parents and their children that are separated because they've been placed in an out-of-home placement, and ongoing support for families after reunification has been achieved. So Strong Starts coordinators work with families all the way through the end of their court supervision. And oftentimes there are transitions in case planning teams when children are in care versus when they're home under court-ordered supervision, and the coordinator is consistent throughout the case. Next slide. So Strong Starts aims to achieve both systemic goals as well as support for individuals and families that we work with. We are trying to enhance the knowledge of infant development and its application by project partners, engagement of the community around the needs of court-involved infants and toddlers and their families. We're really trying to employ a collaborative problem-solving approach. As Susan mentioned before, oftentimes court processes are quite adversarial. And we're really focusing on a shorter time to case resolution and permanency because of the frequent court appearances that Strong Starts families have with the Strong Starts judge. And with an ultimate goal of reducing recidivism and intergenerational cycles of neglect and abuse. For the individual families that we work with, we're really trying to identify services and support practices that really strengthen and repair and protect children's important relationships. We are suggesting and introducing relational interventions such as child-parent psychotherapy, CPP, and other relational services. We are trying to identify services that really maintain and restore a healthy developmental trajectory for children and reduce the reoccurrence of maltreatment and their reentry into foster care when they're older. So this is a list of services Strong Starts families get connected to. These are some examples. Through the Strong Starts clinical coordinators assessment, we may identify needs in a variety of domains and connect families with clinically appropriate services accordingly. Services like early Head Start, services like relational services that may not necessarily be on the radar of child welfare. Of importance to note is the variety of parent-child relational interventions, which really have a particular focus on repairing relationships rather than teaching parenting skills. Strong Starts often suggests home visiting programs for the families that we work with, as we have found that families are quite receptive to these services, given that they feel less stigmatizing to them, and involvement in the child welfare system is not a requirement to participate, nor is it necessarily the focus. So families often feel supported in what their needs are. And for families with very young children, especially in New York City, home visiting is much more manageable than a service located within the community or within a clinic. So families don't have to, transport young children on public transportation with strollers and car seats. We also know that these programs bring attention and support to the parent-infant relationship and have a focus on child development and early literacy and pre-academic skills. Home visiting programs also have a solid track record for building protective factors in families, which thereby reduces the likelihood of future child abuse and neglect. Strong Starts also hosts a number of trainings for the court community, which focus on the specific needs of infants and toddlers, where we have been able to bring in outside speakers who are experts in their respective fields to talk about issues affecting the families with which we work. Prior to the pandemic, trainings were hosted in person in each borough during the court's lunch hour. And now that we have the opportunity to present virtually, we've opened up our trainings to all the boroughs and Westchester, where we have Strong Starts located. And due to this flexibility, they've been very well attended. So this is just a list of topics that we've provided trainings on, such as introduction to infant mental health, different evidence-based programs such as home visiting programs, things like the early intervention process and system, and then other trainings have focused on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and how that presents in parents, supporting parenting teens in foster care. We're often referred a lot of young parents, especially parents who are in care themselves. And another example is supporting parents with intellectual disabilities in foster care. A key component of our model includes the convening of a steering committee. Meetings occur quarterly in each borough and are led by the Strong Starts judge in that borough, as well as the clinical coordinator. The purpose is to build community around the needs of court-involved infants and their families. Members of the steering committee include representatives from each of the legal groups, the child protective agencies, government agencies such as early intervention, DHS, different systems that our families come into contact with to help sort of problem solve barriers that they might face with each of those systems and increase communication between the systems. And really it's to build community around the needs of our clients and the families that are court involved. There could be presentations on different services that are available in the community by the service providers. We also have discussed policies that affect infants and families, to have multiple people's input about those policies and how they're seeing them play out for families. And to problem solve around some of those issues. And we've also had a discussion of best practice recommendations, for example, where there's domestic violence and families are affected by domestic violence. And it's also an opportunity to discuss continuous program improvement and ensure that we are following the model. So this slide outlines how we've expanded over the last 7 years, starting in the Bronx Family Court in 2015, and then subsequently expanding to all 5 boroughs and Westchester by 2022. We have learned through this work that there is an incredible number of professionals involved in each child's case, with some children having as many as 43 professionals or adults involved, which that includes attorneys, case planners, clinical providers, caregivers. And the role of the clinical coordination of those professionals is absolutely essential to the communication and to positive outcomes for children. As a result, each coordinator works with no more than 20 children at a time, so that really high quality intervention and careful attention can be paid to each family's unique needs. And over the course of our work in all of the Strong Start sites, to date, we've served over 200 children and over 400 caregivers. Through the Strong Starts model and the intervention of the clinical coordinator, we have found that there's increased collaboration between the attorneys and between the attorneys themselves, and then between attorneys and the clinical service providers, who often do not have direct contact, and information about clinical services is provided second or third hand, and then attorneys are often have to take a position based on that information. There's an increased understanding by parents and families of court processes, expectations, increased understanding of the court process by service providers. Oftentimes the clinical coordinator is in close collaboration with service providers that are directly serving families that really may not understand exactly what is happening in court, how long the court process is, what's expected to happen at the court date, and how they can best advocate for families within that process. We found that there's increased collaboration with larger systems such as EI and DHS, the Department of Corrections, as we've often worked with parents who are incarcerated. There is also increased support for and inclusion of foster care providers, increased developmental monitoring of infants and toddlers, and early detection of delays. Clinical coordinators do ages and stages questionnaires for each child that they work with, and then refer accordingly if it seems that the child may benefit from a further evaluation, and then follows up on ensuring that those evaluations occur and that services are in place. And there's a better understanding of the impact of trauma on very young children, which Susan mentioned before. Oftentimes there's a misconception that young children and infants sort of aren't impacted by trauma because they don't remember. And there's also a greater understanding among judges, attorneys, and caseworkers of the importance of these relational interventions, such as CPP and home visiting, that we often suggest. Strong Starts has been impactful in a number of ways, including increased collaboration between parties and counsel, shortened times to permanency, reduced moves when children are in care, because clinical coordinators can provide a lot of clinical support to alternative caregivers who may struggle with understanding and responding to children's behaviors, increased support of caregivers, improved relationships between parents and foster parents, as clinical coordinators often can assess and understand when there may be discord or a rupture in relationships between parents and foster parents, and that can often impact children, and it can impact placement stability. An increase in knowledge within the court community about infant development and attachment, and the high quality services that are available to families. We have had multiple requests by judges that are not Strong Starts judges, and attorneys that are not on Strong Starts cases for short-term consultations from the Strong Starts team, which we've been happy to offer for families that are not part of the Strong Starts program. We recently had a program evaluation that utilized the feedback from caregivers, attorneys, and judges to garner outcomes of their experiences of the program and its effectiveness. Families reported that they felt that they had increased their knowledge of early childhood development and their understanding of trauma, and the importance of attachment and their role in their child's life. And judges and attorneys reported that Strong Start's involvement has impacted their practice through understanding early childhood and infant mental health, through understanding the resources available to families that they work with. And they did feel that the Strong Starts model, with its frequent clinical conferences and court appearances, allowed them to sort of get things done more quickly. So the main takeaways are that participation in Strong Starts is associated with reduced likelihood of future abuse and neglect petitions, and participants of Strong Starts felt respected and heard and found that Strong Starts helped to increase fairness throughout the process. So this slide outlines the permanency outcomes for Strong Starts children, and you'll notice that the vast majority of the children are able to remain home with their parents or achieve permanency with a family member. We've had only 2 children that were adopted and non-kinship placements, and the rest are either with a parent or a family member.
I'm sorry. Okay, should I take it from here, Anna Marie? Okay, so here's where we're going next. We are always continuing to think about how to refine, expand, and improve our program evaluation efforts in order to document the impact. That's very important to our sustainability, to be able to speak about the impact. And it's not an easy program to evaluate because the families all have such unique needs, and even county to county we find that practices are very, very variable. So it's not like we've got a unified population or uniform set of interventions. So program evaluation is challenging, but we continue to work on that. We are interested in supporting any other locality that's interested in developing infant toddler courts. Sometimes we get inquiries from other counties that have some interest, and we're happy to provide some technical assistance. One of the things we're working on right now is developing some legislation that might support best practice standards for infants and toddlers within the family courts. There are other states that have been able to enact legislation related to best practices, and sometimes that legislation is even accompanied by some public sources of support. So we're working on that both in order to promote best practices and also to try to diversify the funding for Strong Starts. And importantly and relevant to all of you, we are interested in Strong Starts becoming a statewide system. You probably know that New York has a unified court system, unified across the state. And we actually have recently responded to a request for proposals for statewide expansion. We have not heard back yet about that grant application. But if we get it, and we're hoping we do, if we get it, we'll be starting Strong Starts in some upstate and western counties of New York. We'll keep everyone posted if that happens. Okay, so that is the end of our formal presentation. We're really eager to hear your thoughts and reactions and your experiences with the child welfare system. So I don't know, I have not been monitoring the chat.
Thank you very, very much, Susan and Anna Marie. This was incredibly informative, and something that really struck me was just the amount of awareness and partnership that it drives, which is kind of a central theme of the HVCI as well. We're wanting to be a connector to kind of connect programs and services to each other so they're aware. So we've got a couple questions that have flowed in to the chat, many of them asking about expansion of the program. So as you just kind of spoke to, Susan, questions about, will this expand to Long Island, chances of the program moving upstate, et cetera. So I suppose the answer is just kind of stay tuned.
Okay, well, yeah, a little bit, but let me just add, Long Island actually has some efforts going on that we stay closely connected to, although they're not officially part of Strong Starts, but there is in Suffolk County some work going on in the family courts that brings a lot of infant mental health expertise, and I'm happy to direct anybody who is from Suffolk or interested in Suffolk to the people who are doing the work out there. Nassau County did also have a project. I'm not sure the status of that right now, but you know, if we would like to join with all of these programs, because even if they don't become official Strong Starts sites, it would help for legislative actions and other activities to be, you know, a unified infant toddler court system. So that's what's going on Long Island. In the rest of the state, again, if we get this grant, it will be Buffalo and Binghamton that have been interested in developing infant toddler courts. So we will be working with those counties if we get that grant. And separate from any grants, we're happy to provide technical assistance. Our project has been entirely supported by private foundation funding, or at least 90% funded by private foundation funding. We can help counties think about how to get private foundation support while we all work toward increasing government support. We can help, you know, in any way, any county that's interested. It has to start with an interested judge or an amenable family court. That there's really no substitute for there being, you know, judicial interest and family court interest. It is a family court-based project. Often we have community providers of services who are very interested, but we have to engage the courts, and really our judges are so enthusiastic about the model that there can be judge-to-judge contact for any judge who really wants to hear more about that. Our judges are good salespeople for the approach because I think they have found it to be, you know, a really positive step.
So I think that kind of answers one of the questions in the chat about how are family court judges informed of the initiative. So in your experience, is it kind of word of mouth?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much word of mouth. You know, 0 to 3 does a lot of dissemination, but judges are not usually accessing 0 to 3 information until we direct them that way. It is largely word of mouth. We're happy to help with that. But again, that's an important place for things to start. If you want to expose your judges or your family court to this idea, again, I would direct you to the 0 to 3 website. Sometimes they used to call them Safe Babies Court Teams. It may still be listed under that, or infant toddler courts. They have great videos that judges can look at. They're not very time consuming. Other documents. So I think 0 to 3 is a great resource for anybody who wants to kind of dangle this idea in front of their courts. Again, we're happy to help.
Thank you for that. There was another recent question in the chat here that says Onondaga County has also been interested but lacks a needed judge. How can we take a next step other than electing an interested
I'm
judge?
sorry, you can help me with this, Maggie. Tell me the more commonly known name for Onondaga, because we may have some information.
Onondaga County is in like central New York.
Syracuse?
Yeah,
Right,
Syracuse area.
Yeah, I don't have any. I don't have anything to report about Syracuse other than the fact that a long time ago, before the pandemic, a whole team from Syracuse that included a family court judge and included your well-known pediatrician in Syracuse who has specialized medical clinics for children in foster care, and one other person came to visit us from Syracuse, and so we thought there was some interest there. It didn't really go anywhere, but there was some beginning steps. We have been talking to early childhood people in Rochester who have long wanted to bring this model to Rochester but couldn't engage their courts. And I've been meaning to get back to some of those colleagues in Rochester to tell you that there has been a breakthrough that one of your important judges did now express interest. So we have to get back to our colleagues in Rochester and say we can start thinking about this. We thought there were barriers in Rochester. You know, courts are very overwhelmed post-pandemic or almost post-pandemic. Courts got very slowed down. They closed. They had huge backlogs of cases. They lost staff. You know, courts were very disrupted during the pandemic, and it was hard for many jurisdictions to think about adding special projects. But, you know, hopefully we're on the recovery from that curve.
A couple more quick questions here. Thank you for that, Susan. What is Child Safety Alert 14? I think it was on a couple slides.
Yeah, thank you. I know I realize our project used to be just New York City based, and now that we're not anymore, we have to be careful. Child Safety Alert 14 is a very important policy, though it may be called different things. Now, it's a policy that says when a parent has children in foster care and becomes pregnant again, rather than fall back to the default of just removing that brand new baby as soon as it's born, because there have been some risks in the family, that people really have to think now before this next baby is born about the extent to which circumstances may have changed, that safety risks may have been mitigated, and maybe it's really perfectly okay to leave that baby in the care of a parent, even when there are older children in foster care. We have found that to be a really important policy, because taking a baby, a newborn baby away from a parent is a drastic move that we'd like to see prevented whenever possible. And the Child Safety Alert is a policy of our Administration on Children and Families that says that there should be pre-birth planning conferences now to avoid the possibility, if it can be avoided, of that baby automatically being removed. So of course, we have been very involved in the promotion of that policy, and because many, even though it is an important policy, oftentimes practitioners don't know about it. And so we're part of the group that's trying to disseminate that information and make people understand that if you have a pregnant parent, we need to be in conference planning mode and see if we can avoid that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that explanation. Okay, and then one more question. Is this program aware of the New York State Parenting Education credential? So I'm assuming speaking to those supports and services provided to parents.
Well, that sounds important, and I'm not sure we know everything we need to know about it. Can whoever put that question in, unmute and tell us a little more, because it sounds like we have things to learn from you too.
Karen, I'm not sure if you're in a position to unmute and speak a little bit about that.
Hi, this is Karen Sweeney. I'm located in Steuben County, and there is a credential that has been in place for pretty close to 10 years, and it's through the New York State Parent Education Partnership, which is part of Child Abuse New York. And these are individuals that have applied for a credential using, they've created a portfolio with core competencies that are in place. So these are highly qualified parenting educators. So they would definitely fall into, strong support systems. These are individuals that do individual parenting education and also group parenting education. So
great for us to know. And is there a resource that tells us where to find?
Yes, you would go to the New York State Parent Education Partnership website, and you would find a list of those that have been credentialed.
And thank you, Karen, very much. I'm going to interject here quickly because I realized that that's the New York State Parenting Education Partnership, and on staff at Prevent Child Abuse New York, we have a program team that runs NICEPEP. So we can connect you. I'm happy to do that, Susan.
Great,
thank you, Karen.
Awesome. Thank you.
Important for us to know about.
So I'm just scrolling through the chat, and again, it's, expressions, thank yous, and questions about expansion. So I think folks are very excited and encouraged and energized by this work. And I thank you very much for the presentation today, Susan and Anna Marie. So as I said earlier, I will paste this recording in a link and provide information about how to access it to folks who were on the call today and to other registrants. And I just want to say thank you very much again on behalf of the HVCI and on behalf of Prevent Child Abuse New York. And I will be in touch with follow-up information and circle back.
Okay, and I will just say before we end that Prevent Child Abuse New York has been a really important partner for us, not only in thinking about this, but also have provided really excellent trainings for us. We mentioned our trainings, and Prevent Child Abuse New York will be the first to know when we get notification about the statewide expansion grant. So hopefully you'll all know too. Thank you again for inviting us.
Thank you very much, Susan and Marie. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.